Tony sat watching the sun descend behind the projects. Young children played gaily around him. A few yards away, slightly older children, but children nonetheless, exchanged drugs for money. It was a familiar scene. So familiar, it was easy not to notice, to simply accept and grow into. But Tony had always noticed. The scope of his vision extended well beyond the asphalt jungle he had been born into. Real life lay ahead, somewhere behind these tenement buildings. Real life was the land the sun went to every night. He once believed that the fear to the sunset world was what he could afford. But it seemed he would have to spend his very soul, and he was not willing to pay that steeper price. A couple of young men drinking from 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor, both wearing Negro League baseball jerseys, swaggered by. The taller of the two, sporting cornrows in his hair and at least 3 gold teeth, stared him down. Tony wisely ignored him, not least because of the suspicious bulge in the shorter guy's back pocket. He saw no purpose in getting shot because someone was in a bad mood, or perhaps just plain bored. They got into a Jeep parked at the corner, and music came screaming from the mega-sized speakers in the back as the vehicle departed. Tony's view of the future may have been altered, but his perception of the present had not. This was not where he wanted to be. This was not how he wanted to live. He did not wish to become these people. But these were his people. Did this not mean that he was ashamed of who he was? What else could account for him seeking shelter in Janet's arms? Why had it taken white people's direct showing of hatred to finally make him question his value system? How far would he have gone from himself to get away from what he feared becoming? The tennis ball bounced towards him, followed by a beautiful little girl with the biggest pair of hazel eyes he'd ever seen. She stopped and held out her hand, innocence personified. He resisted the temptation to pinch her cheeks and returned the ball. "Don't ever grow up," he said. She answered with a precocious smile, then ran back to her friends. No, Tony decided. It definitely wasn't being black that he hated. It was the poverty, ignorance, and desperation this girl would find herself mired in. It would take away her innocence and become part of her. The journey from playing with dolls and jumping rope to turning tricks for a quick high was a brutally short one. She had not chosen these circumstances. They were her birthright. The color of her skin had not made them so. They just were. They emanated from the credo of the ghetto. Get yours anyhow, anyway, just as long as you get it fast, because you might not be around tomorrow. And that might not be such a bad thing. Tony knew what he wanted from life and the surest way to get it. The one thing he hadn't figured out was people. He thought too well of them, refused to believe what his father preached and Charlie cautioned about. Surely theirs were clouded judgments, prejudiced by bad experiences, blind, deaf, and dumb to good ones. Only an open mind could recognize the truth. The truth which came to be was that he had been scorned and rejected, not for who he was, but what he was. A black man who had infiltrated territory forbidden to him, inhabited and guarded by those whose gravest fear was contamination by his kind. He'd had the audacity to fall in love with the native of this foreign land, but in the end, she proved to be no better, no different than the rest. So he decided to suffer from selective amnesia, forgotten to be the sound of Janet's laughter, the feel of her lips against the skin, the way her hair spread out over his chest as they lay in repose, the look on her face as they made love, the sound of her voice when she said he was her sun and moon and stars. Only by deleting heaven from his memory did he have a chance to survive on earth. But he could not free himself from the grip of nostalgia. Every time he saw her with Roger, a piece of him died. How many could he possibly spare? He sympathized with the three bears a millionfold. Someone else was sleeping contentedly on his side of the bed. He craved Janet's touch, knew that his will was no match for the addiction. One tender look from her would be enough to shatter his china doll resolve, but she always held her gaze steady and beyond him. Just about anything served as bittersweet forget-me-not. Lyrics of songs addressed him personally. Book and movie plots turned out to be pale duplicates of his life story. TV commercials for anything from deodorant to pre-owned cars found ways to strum his heartstrings. Besides these blatant instances, there were also occasions when memories crept up on him with the stealth of a secret agent in masterful disguise. The ghost of their love affair proved able to haunt him through the laughter of a child, a scent wafting through the open door of a bakery, the way a particular cloud hung in the sky. Had he been wrong to surrender what he treasured? By accusing Janet of wanting to be back with Roger, had he enforced a terrible prophecy? The most ridiculous of fabrications will be perceived as fact if repeated often enough. Tony's mounting insecurities had metamorphosed him from the man Janet loved into someone she can no longer tolerate. Roger must have seemed like a pretty good alternative, considering. On the other hand, science class taught him that certain chemicals could not combine under any circumstances. If forced together, the result would be explosive. Towards the end of their relationship, Tony's body had become a cauldron of obsession and resent. Loving Janet did not mix with these ingredients. He had pushed her away in order to prevent a catastrophe, and there had been no gentle way of doing so. Did this mean he had done the right thing? He now realized that right and wrong were intertwined notions. His arms could not differentiate between just and unjust causes. They only knew that they were empty. 3 times he had almost given in, nearly confessing that he couldn't take things being this way. Not as long as he remembered how they had been, and that would likely be forever. He hung up after 1 ring the first time, after 2 the second. On the 3rd occasion, she picked up right away. He had accused Janet of whatever his harried mind could concoct, employing any leap of logic that would connect the dots that formed the picture of her betrayal. As payback, she made good on these accusations. They had both made pathetic attempts to deny what was painfully obvious, that they were meant to be together. Hello? Hello? Is anybody there? Who is this? Then she hung up. The sound of Janet's voice was not enough to dissolve Tony's shame. He could still feel the sting in his hand from when it struck her. Could she still love him, even if she wanted to? How dare he expect her to accept romantic declarations after he had shown his darkest side, proving that his version of love wasn't always accompanied by innocent kisses, but if provoked by a mindless, violent rage. Striving to win back her love would likely gain him nothing but confirmation that she now hated him. Better not to know for certain. Better to learn how to keep the past in place. How not to be so trusting. Not to assume that people's motives were pure. To give up on the fallacy that in its blindness, love still managed to conquer every foe. He would learn his lessons well. There was one other matter to be taken care of. He must see his father, apologize for not listening. Let him know that his message had finally gotten through. Tony had to figure out the impossible. How could he stop loving Janet? How could he start to love his father again?